Well, I know so far we have Rumor and IDK on. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining the conference today. We also have Julian Petty from Warner Records, our EVP of Business Affairs. And while we wait for Chica, and I know we also have people signing in as we go, we'll start. And as we start, we'll give folks a few moments to join into the conversation. But I wanted to start just with a brief introduction. And, my name is Chris Atlas. I'm SVP, Head of Urban at Warner Records. Want to thank everyone for joining us for this discussion today. We've all been deeply impacted by the recent events in our country, and we're moved to continue to use our voice and influence in a positive way to create change. The discussion we're having today is meant to be the first of many as an outlet for our artists and our company, and the importance of using our voices to encourage positive change, not only in our community, but in policies. We commend everyone that is using their voice to promote change in a positive and peaceful manner. A few of our artists that we'll hear from today, Chica, Rumor, IDK, are doing just that. We want to give an honorable mention to a few others: Wale, Gary Clark Jr., Andra Day, and so many more who have also committed their voices to change. We salute Len Blavatnik, the Blavatnik Foundation, and Warner Music Group for the commitment to a $100 million fund to support charitable causes related to the music industry, social justice, and campaigns against violence and racism. And with that, I'd like to introduce and turn over the discussion today to my esteemed friend and colleague, Gail Mitchell, Executive Director of R&B and Hip Hop at Billboard Magazine. Gail?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Warner Records, for having me. Earlier, before we signed on, I was watching part of the celebration of life for George Floyd in Minneapolis, and I was struck again by what a momentous week and a half, I guess, that we've all witnessed. And I think even more exciting is the growing chorus of voices that are rising up here and all over the world. I don't know if anybody watched, I'm all over CNN, but they were just showing some of the countries overseas that are rising up in union with us, calling for social justice and the end of race and the beginning once and for all for racial equality. So as President Obama said yesterday, it's time for all of us to be able to sit down, highlight the problems, talk, and then out of these conversations, translate those into practical and lasting solutions. So I'm honored to be here to talk with 4 people that are on the front lines. They've been protesting, they've been behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, pushing to make this momentous moment in history continue moving forward. And as I said earlier, make a lasting impact on the coming generations. I'm the mom of 2 20-something kids, a son and a daughter, and it's just imperative that this change, and it changed now. So with that, I wanted to introduce the panelists who are speaking today. Chica is from Alabama, LA-based rapper, singer, poet, and artist. Rumor tells me he is born from the world, and he's one of the breakout artists that are coming, bursting out of the music scene, came out earlier this year. And then IDK, Maryland-bred, LA-based rapper, producer, and innovator. So I guess we start, and I'm sorry, Paul Henderson, who heads the Department of Police Accountability for San Francisco and was the former chief prosecutor for Kamala Harris. So welcome all. Good to see you. And I see Julian Petty also, who is head counsel for Warner Music Group. So I guess we can start with Rumor. Talk a little bit about your experiences of being on the front lines and what you've experienced, what you've seen, what your takeaways are at this point.
I experienced real life. You know what I'm saying? Like flying out from LA to go to Minneapolis. I didn't really know what to expect. You feel me? Mm-hmm. Like when we landed, it was so polarizing because right when we landed, we seen smoke from the city. The whole city was burning. Like the airport is a little bit outside the city. So the whole city was burning and it was on fire. And you just got like a feeling that the state was in turmoil. You feel me? So when we actually went in there and we started touching the people and we started talking to the people, you know, I started having a little bit of conversation, you know, what's going on, so and so, how do y'all feel? You know, it's just justice hasn't been served. You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, it's getting to that point right now, but for the longest time, you know what I'm saying, our race of people, you know, under this mask, I'm African American. So our race of people have been struggling for more than 400 years. You feel me? Like I always say, the most influential man in the world is Willie Lynch. You feel me? Like, what he did is gonna take a lot, you know what I'm saying, to undo. So just going around the people and whatnot and hearing their perspective, seeing it face to face, you know, and marching with them, yeah, it was polarizing.
Okay. IDK,
Yeah.
chat about your experiences and what you've seen.
You know, a lot of what I've been doing is kind of paying attention to what's going on social media. I did go out a couple of times. Masked up. I kind of like was really, I went out by myself. No one really knew, you know, who I was or anything. And I was just kind of paying attention, observing. For the most part, what I experienced was peaceful. You know, a lot of people willing to go to jail and get arrested in order to, you know, make a point. For the most part, what I experienced was beautiful. And the reason why I say that is because this is the first time I think I've seen a situation where, you know, other races, especially white people, have been kind of blunt about what's going on. It's like no beating around the bush, you know, like really, really saying exactly what's going on with the systematic oppression and everything that we've been dealing with as Black people. So for me, my experience, and you know, I haven't seen any of the crazy things that I've been watching on the news, but my experience was beautiful. And it seems like at least there's a lot more awareness than there's ever been before, you know, and for me, that's progression.
Okay. I'm told Chica will be joining us soon. Is that still the case, Chris? We're working on that before I go to Paul.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working on that. She should be joining in any minute. She was going down to protest again herself today.
Exactly. So. All right. So Paul, from your vantage point, because you're really on the front lines where it's really imperative that these conversations happen, that the law and the community come as one and be able to talk and work this thing through. And as IDK just said, it's been a long time coming for a lot of Black people. They dated back to the days of slavery. We've just been fighting and fighting. It's been over 400 years. So talk a little bit from your perspective as to what your job entails and how you had to really jump into the front lines right away with everything that's been unfolding for the last week and a half.
Sure. So my role here is in police oversight, civilian oversight. And so my agency both develops policy, it audits law enforcement agencies, and we investigate misconduct with law enforcement agencies. Currently, that's with the police department and with the sheriff's department. And so, you know, this isn't a fight that's been coming. This is a fight that has been here for a long time. And we have been, and when I say we, I mean communities that are interested in addressing separate tracks of justice for a long time. But it's a difficult fight because it feels like every fight that we win in Kansas occurs again later in Michigan, and then we see it later in Los Angeles. And these things just keep happening again and again and again, you know, just to the points that I thought that Rumor was making and IDK was making, and you hear the different approaches that they're talking about in terms of what their experience was in seeing how this is evolving. Rumor seeing a city on fire and fighting, and then IDK's experience from it being calm, but we're still talking about the same thing. We're still talking about unrest. We're still talking about demands for action and trying to articulate and define what those calls to action can be. I think part of the problem in terms of the big scope of what we're dealing with is we see these problems when we turn on the television, and we see problems that make sense to us of injustice and things that aren't right, with Tamir Rice, with Trayvon Martin, with Freddie Gray, with George Floyd. I mean, the list goes on, and it feels like Groundhog's Day for flashpoints of injustice for us, for all communities, that justice isn't being defined in the ways that we think that it should be. And there are these recorded statements that we're all saying now that that's what the call to action is, right? I think when you see the protests, when you see the rallies, and even when you see what's being defined as riots, they're all just a sense of authentic anger and a demand for specific change. And I will just say that the impact is the conversations like this, so that people feel empowered with what's happening and justified in doing something and taking action to move something. And one of the most important things I think we can do, and that we are doing, is giving our voices to that and articulating it, doing more than staying silent and watching it on the television or hearing about it and reading about it in the paper. These conversations raise awareness and translate that awareness into action. Because with all of the awareness, I don't think very many people can say that they don't know what's going on, because they see it and they hear about it. And if nothing else, they're under a curfew, or they can't do the things that they wanted to do because they see things changing in their towns and cities. But we have learned this as a community, that awareness is not justice. Action translates into justice. So we have to connect the dots and talk about what are we doing and what are we capable of doing in order to try and convert and funnel our frustration and funnel our awareness into a change that's going to be long lasting and institutionalized, so it doesn't turn into a whack-a-mole type of approach of like, well, we fixed that in San Diego, but we haven't fixed that in Minnesota, or we fixed this singular thing in Mississippi, but we still have that exact same problem in Chicago. That's the approach we have to take towards this. And so I'm just eager, grateful, and excited that we're having conversations like this, so people can hear and share in the platforms for these amazing artists and their reach, for people that listen to their music, but want to know that behind that music are some real thoughts that connects them to broader communities about a demand for change and a demand for a redefinition of justice that's more inclusive. So sorry, I know I got on a roll, but.
Oh, you're fine.
That was great.
Yeah, it was great. So speaking of music, Rumor, and I will talk to you, ask you this as well, IDK, so you can be thinking about this. With everything that's happening and the issues that are cropping up in these various conversations, how will that impact your music moving forward, or has it already?
It already has, you know, like leaving Minneapolis to come back to LA. Obviously, there was a lot of things going on in my head, but, you know, it came out as records. I think I did like 3 records on the plane, you know what I'm saying? And then think about like my next project and whatnot. I wanna go ahead and put that in there and put that out. I wanna raise awareness, you feel me? Like I wanna raise awareness to not only what's going on now, but what has happened in the past, you feel me? And then what could happen in the future.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same tip. You know, it's like I've been already speaking about a lot of these things in my music, and a lot of even some of the stuff that I've been saying before starting to resurface now. A majority of my fan base, you know, it seems like, you know, are pretty much white, and it's like if they listen to what I'm doing and they're paying attention to what I'm doing and the lyrics in my music, I feel like I have a obligation to kind of educate, you know, about a lot of these things that's going on. A lot of what I've been paying attention to, whether it's social media or going out there or whatever, a lot of it is kind of inspiring me to go a little bit deeper into some of the things that I've already been thinking. It's given me, you know, a lot of inspiration to kind of write about you know, things that I believe people don't fully understand. I was just on DJ Academics' page, and he posted this white girl arguing with her parents about pretty much why Black people are in the position they're in. And, you know, she was for us, and her parents were kind of like, no, they're in the ghetto, and why can't they just change, and blah, blah, blah. I think even that inspired me to maybe make a song about why it's so hard to change. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people just don't fully understand that it's not that simple. And that like baffles me, honestly, the more I think about it. But, you know, a lot of what's going on 100% has shifted the way that I feel like I need to make some of my music. That's for sure.
So you both feel that social consciousness, you know, back in the day, I'm dating myself now, and Chris will know, and Julian, but you know, you had the, well, you guys know about NWA and Public Enemy, but before that, you know, Marvin Gaye with What's Going On, and some of the other songs that have come through in terms of protests and whatever. So, and a lot of the original civil rights movement, the start of it back in the 50s through the 60s, a lot of, you know, you had Gil Scott-Heron, the revolution will not be televised, and here it is being televised and streamed at this point. But you had all these songs come out of that movement. So do you see that cycle happening, especially in hip hop now, more socially conscious songs and anthems?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. Before I speak on that, I just need a little bit more time to observe what other artists are doing. You know, I think the same artists that we're used to doing, used to seeing making this type of music for sure. I am seeing a few other artists that I haven't really seen that kind of music from start to do little things for sure. But time will tell for me. I know what I can control and what I'm doing. I mean, that's the reason why I wear my hat the way that I wear it. It's from Marvin Gaye, actually.
Exactly, red and everything.
Yeah, I got his record in my studio right now, you know, and that's someone that I inspire to be like too, you know, I'm inspired by. So, you know, for sure I could speak for myself, yes. And even some of the people that I'm around and I'm close with, you know, I'm sure that influence will rub off on them too. But, you know, time will tell.
Okay. Before I go back to Paul, I wanted to ask both of you, since you're there on the front lines, I've only been seeing it on TV. I think what struck me, I was here in '92 for the LA riots after Rodney King. But what's striking me this time around is the multiracial component of the voices and of the protesters that are out there now. I mean, it's all colors of the rainbow. Were you guys struck by that at all, being there in the middle of it?
Oh man, I'm seeing some of the other races go even harder than us. And I was definitely struck by that, you know, because that's not what I guess I expected. To be honest, my experience, I even saw a lot of the police officers kind of like trying hard to be really nice, you know, like harder than I've ever seen them, to, you know, waving at me and saying hello and, you know what I mean? A lot nice car, like things like that. So, I mean, I'm definitely struck by just everything that's going on. That's why I feel like there is progression, although it's not exactly what we need, like it's not fully there. And, you know, and I know that will take time. I am seeing progress to some extent, you know.
Okay. Ruben?
The same thing, yeah. You know, being in Minnesota, it was like a huge melting pot. You know, a lot of whites, a lot of blacks, even the Native Americans and, you know, the Hispanics and whatnot, we're going hard together. So, yeah, exactly.
Okay. So,
Hey, Gail,
yeah, go ahead.
I'd also like to, you know, introduce Aishah White, who's our SVP of Media and Public Relations at Warner. And she's also very active and vocal and at several of the protests. And, you know, just as a Black woman, I would love to hear her view and perspective as well, because we know that the conversation, you know, has affected, you know, our Black women as well.
Exactly. Sure. Nice to hear from you, Aishah.
Hi, Gail. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I mean, you know, just to Chris's point, this is a critical moment, and it's so important that everyone, you know, not only Black men and women, but everyone come together and unite around this common goal. we all have a responsibility to use our voices, to use whatever we can to affect positive change. And I'm just trying to do my part, whether it's helping to put this together to, you know, educate and encourage other people on ways that they can help, or being out on the front line with our artists and with my own family. I mean, this is something that is important, and we have the attention right now. We have people watching us and waiting to see what we're going to do. And to Paul's point, you know, action right now is what everyone is focused on. And getting out there, being with the people, being on the streets, it just feels right. It feels good. I could not go, because seeing how everyone else is out here pushing, fighting for the same goal, it just makes me want to go that much harder. I'm fired up from all of this. And I want, you know, everyone to know that our artists are too, this community, this industry, we are all serious about making change right now. And this is the beginning. So I'm really grateful that everyone could come out today and be a part of this. It's important conversation, and getting out there, being in front of people on the front lines, protesting, you know, handing out waters, or even just, you know, saying something encouraging, whether it's to a police officer or to someone on the streets. Right now, it's so important. And what I love to see out of all of this, even though we are dealing with so much and the world is upside down, we're all coming together. And that's the beauty in it. Like, together we are stronger. And this is not only a lesson, but an opportunity for all of us to show up, you know?
Great, thank you. So Paul, going back to your work, what is the biggest disconnect you think there's been between the two sides in terms of conversation? What needs to happen? What do we need to do to help foster better communications between the two sides?
I think there has to be a broader understanding of how these systems work, and because that informs what the solutions are. And I can talk about that in a second, but before I do, I just want to say that even in terms of this panel, this is what matters. Your presence matters. Those of you that are working as executives in this industry, and those of you that are artists in this industry, the music matters because our culture matters. And the reason that I think it's particularly important is because it's the vehicle by which broad communities are brought together with a level of understanding. That level of understanding is elevated because of what we present to the communities. That presentation allows allies to come to the table with a glimpse of understanding of what our everyday experiences are. And to the degree those experiences are a reflection or a lens of injustice, that makes a difference. That forms an understanding and brings people to the table to have these conversations. And here's like the important thing that I say all the time is that we can't fix what we can't talk about. And our conversations are defined by the music that we listen to, by what we watch on television, and the conversations that we have on the street and with our peers. And so it really does matter. But circling that back into what it means is we have to shape those conversations, translate them into action so that communities and individuals feel empowered by a conversation about race and race disparities. And they feel empowered about our justice system so that they know and understand that all communities are entitled to have a seat at the table to define what public safety looks like for their communities. That's a really empowering thing when you realize that your tax dollars, your input, your vote actually defines what happens in your own community. And we have to start having those conversations and translating our anger, our frustration, and our awareness into actions with even some simple things and some of the solutions that we can be enacting at a local level, at a state level, and at a federal level to make sure that we get changes and we get accountability into some of our systems. And those things can be as easy as questioning and finding out. We can Google right now and find out in every city throughout this country whether or not our departments have a use of force policy that's been reformed. Most departments have not. And if they have not, that means that you are still using restrained neck techniques. We're still shooting at cars. We're still using force in a way that doesn't combine distance, that doesn't define less restrictive use of force. And it's a tinderbox waiting to happen. And that's why we see these things popping up throughout the country, because we don't have the safeguards in place that we could be and should be demanding right now, because we're not asking the right questions, or municipalities are fighting against those questions. The presence of having civilian oversight, and this is some of the work that I do, is very important to articulate a voice on behalf of community with police and law enforcement, because it's an esoteric practice area, but it's really important, I think, that we prevent law enforcement from doing the things that we don't want them to do, just as much as we are making demands on them to do what we want them to do. And I think that IDK made a good point when he was saying, like, you know, there are some cops that he's saying that are really trying, and that there are law enforcement agencies out there that are doing the wrong thing. And I agree that they are, but we have to make sure that they aren't colored, no pun intended, with the bad behavior that we see when we turn on the news, or the bad behavior we hear about when we talk to our fellow communities, or the bad experience that we've all had individually, because those are just as important. But we have to be talking about them and translating those experiences into specific actions that people can join in, participate in, and make lasting differences on all of the communities that we live in. So.
Okay. Well, I have a question that I've gotten in from a viewer, listener, and we'll start first with the artists, and then Paul, it's also for you as well. But
yeah,
what 2 or 3 action items, Rumor and IDK, do you think artists need to take on the local levels at wherever they're from that can be impactful now?
I think the most important thing right now that's pretty easy for a lot of people to do, provided, you know, they're in a situation where they can do it, is vote. Like, I think, like, making sure, like, a lot of the people, like, I know where I'm from, I got a lot of influence with what I do, and a lot of people look up to me, and a lot of, whether it's artists or just, you know, the people that are from where I'm from, they look up to me and pay attention to what I'm doing because of the level of success that I've been able to create. So, you know, I think, like, pushing them in a positive direction with things like voting, you know, I think is one of the things that's very important. You know what I mean? That's probably the main thing that I've been focused on.
Okay, Rumor?
Yeah, I think voting's amazing also. You know, getting to know some of your representatives, that goes in with voting, but getting to know some of your representatives, going to town hall meetings, you know, really getting into the community, your community, and reaching out, you know. I feel like a lot of artists are so detached away from what is going on, even if it's not political, you know, from everything else, that going to some of these town hall meetings and meeting some of these people, you know, in these urban communities or wherever they come from is amazing. So I feel like face-to-face interaction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Aishah, from the label side, what action items do you think need to be taken?
I feel like we need to be focused on organizing right now, on a local level, on a national level, on a community-based level, on an industry level. There are lots of things that we can do if we come together, and getting with people who are like-minded, who have the same goals in mind, who can share resources, and come with a plan of action, I think is something everyone should be looking at right now.
Okay. And then Paul, from your perspective, what is it the intersection between the intersection between the civil rights movement, race equality has always been strong with music, but what would you like to see from supporters on the music side of the fence, be it executives, artists?
Yeah, I think the conversation is really important, right? People are influenced by hearing the artists that they know and like and appreciate and admire. Like, what do they do and what are they doing? So when you are showing up, how are you using your voice? When we're talking about our music, when we're having panels like this and speaking to broad audience, what are you actually doing that you value and you think are important? And like the ideas that we've been talking about today about organizing and voting are really important. And there's simpler things that people can do as well in the meantime, right? Like, we don't get to vote every day, but voting is important. But every day, tomorrow, we can call and ask our mayor. We can send an email to find out from our chief of police whether or not they have a policy about body-worn cameras, right? Let's change the conversation with knowledge and awareness. And why doesn't my county, why doesn't my city have body-worn cameras? And if we have them, what is the policy? Are the officers mandated to turn them on? Do we have a transparency policy so that we can see those body-worn cameras? What's our data collection policy? Are we collecting and analyzing data? Those are the things that affirm for us that changes are taking place or that transgressions are taking place so that we don't have to hear about them with horrible examples when they get recorded from someone's camera. And this is a process or a policy or something that's been going on for a long period of time. And again, we can talk about some of the individual transgressions that we've all seen in the national news, but we don't even have to go there because we all probably have these deeply personal stories where we can talk about information or instances that we know of race disparities that are frustrating to us, and we have to change them. Again, the personal stories can be translated when you have stats. I love statistics because you don't get to argue with my statistics. You may not like my opinion, but you don't get to argue with the fact that African Americans face deadly force 19.3 times more than the rest of society. Now, that's just a fact. What do we do with it? How do we change that? And how do we talk about it and elevate it so that the difference is made in my city and in my town? Let's start with, well, what did you do, police force, this past year, this past quarter? What is your use of force policy? How has it been tracked? And I want to see it with a racial component so that you are turning over or even bothering to collect that information to turn it over. Again, it's difficult to fix what we don't talk about. And we have to educate ourselves so that we are better informed as to how to utilize the tools of knowledge that we get from music, the tools of knowledge that we get from these protests and the rallies, and the tools of knowledge that we get from panels like this so that we walk away from those conversations. We walk away from the experience of that music empowered with something that translates into a specific action that we can all take to make a difference. I think that's just really important. So sorry, I know I get on the roll.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Gail, I would like to speak to the executive point for a second.
Yeah,
I think number one, events like this, organizing events like this are a great step in organizing and affecting change. I think allocating resources and dedicating resources like the Len Blotnovic fund that was announced yesterday, and ensuring that that money gets to the right places where real change can happen on the ground level. But, you know, lastly, as an executive in the building, I think one of the most important things we can do is just have hard conversations, you know, where the people on this panel who work for Warner Records are in a unique position to speak to other high-level executives throughout the entire organization and have real discussions with them. And I think that that's very unique. And I think, you know, at this time, it's just something we all have to step up on. And I think that that will be one of the biggest things we do, because those direct conversations will impact the allocation of those dollars, will impact the organization that the company does, and will result in us, you know, continuing to have these sort of discussions. But Gail, I don't want to take your job, but I do have a question specific for Paul.
Yeah, please. Go ahead. I've got a few more that are coming in, so go with that first. Go ahead.
Can you please direct us into some very specific action items that we can do? I know a number of people are asking that question. And then as a second part, can you talk to qualified immunity at all?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of specific things that I think that we can do, and let's go top to bottom. Let's just talk general stuff that people can be doing, is be demanding that there is a policy about civilian oversight for their law enforcement agencies. That is best practices. We have between 17 to 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this in this country. Civilian oversight is best practices for reform. And this is in 21st century policing. And we have less than 200 or around 200 agencies that are actually doing it. That makes a difference. Demand that in your communities. You know, the things that I talked about earlier about asking, do your law enforcement agencies have body-worn cameras, and what are the policies around them? We have to do more than just ask for the existence of some of these tools. We have to make sure that the tools are utilized in a way that is race neutral, because they're not. And that ties us into the third thing that I think is almost more important than the others, is having the data collection and analyzation of that data that includes race disparities, right? Don't just tell me about how many traffic stops you have. I know they love to turn that information over, but tell me about what the race breakdown is. And I don't want to hear that we can't discern, because some people say African American, some people say Black, some people say colored, some people say Negro. You fix it or turn it all over. I just want to be at the table so that we can have the conversation, because we aren't in the room having those conversations. That's why you are confused and can't pull it together. But if we are there, we matter and we make a difference, because our presence changes the outcome for many of these policies that are being put together. And I think that that speaks to what you were initially talking about when you were saying we as executives have the potential to make a difference. And I want to talk about that too, because our very presence makes a difference. But our presence doesn't mean anything if we unhook our awareness from the opportunities to make a change. And just to say it, I know that when I walk in a room and raise this issue, it may make people uncomfortable when I ask other people, are there any other voices of color in this organization? Are there any other people of color in our hiring practices? How are we managing contracts and looking at the contracts that we have? Are there disparities in our contracts in terms of how we are funding our artists or working with our artists? We have to ask that question. Don't make me feel uncomfortable for asking the question when the results should make you uncomfortable for the institutions that we are working in. But there's no value in walking through that door and having our presence if we're not going to use our voices to make a difference once we are there and at the table. And these are things that we can do every single day, because we have subjective decisions that we make in our lives every day of our own staff and how they are working in the organizations that we work in. We have to lean into that voice and be comfortable in asserting our presence wherever we're going, because we wear our skin color, our community experiences wherever we go. And I think it's empowering, but it's only empowering if we are aware of it. And we become more aware of our power when we're talking about it. And so these are just some of the simple things that we can do. If you do nothing more than raise the issue wherever you're working and say, like, hey, I want to talk about race disparities. How can we be having these conversations, right? That raises awareness. How can we be talking about what we can be doing? Just saying it to initiate that progress initiates a change that can take place. But if we're silent on it, it's difficult to sit back and expect others to care more about the issues that relate to these disparities than we do when we are the victims of those disparities, or we are the holders or the keepers of those disparities, because they're not necessarily going to be on the national news. It's not necessarily going to be in an article in the paper about what happened to you when you went shopping, or what your experience was on your way home from a party, or what you saw on the streets in your neighborhood when you were visiting family. Those things have to be translated into specific actions and accountability. We should all have resources and agencies that we can turn to that are already doing this kind of work, that uplift us and support us and can magnify our voices into things that are already taking place, which leads me to the qualified immunity. See, I didn't forget, I just put it on the back end. So those are complicated issues. qualified immunity, what I think is really important about qualified immunity, these are many of the protections that are built in that allow discretion to law enforcement agencies to make decisions like figure out who and how individuals get charged. So a lot of the conversations where we're seeing, you know, like with Ahmaud Arbery, and you're like, how in the heck did we get to this situation where the murder that we saw on videotape was turned down through 2 prosecutorial agencies and ultimately got to a third after 73 days where something was happening? And why are we even having prosecutors use the grand jury when it involves law enforcement? Because that's not the experience that we see from other communities when they've been engaged with a crime or suspected of a crime. Why is that discretion turned over to the benefit of the doubt of 12 strangers rather than the clear and compelling knowledge that an elected or appointed prosecutor is executing? Because they always have the authority independently to make those kind of charging decisions. And we're not even asking that questions and challenging it because we're not necessarily aware and knowledgeable about those things. And again, that leads back to the voting, but on a bigger scale, those are questions that are being redefined at this moment right now. There are 13 cases pending in front of the Supreme Court about redefining qualified immunity. So we have to be aware of that and making sure that we're trying to make sure that those outcomes have a race-neutral outcome, and we can't rely on that happening because it's elevated through our court systems. There's a number of groups that are working in that area that are addressing those concerns specifically and directly with the Supreme Court. Take Back the Courts is one of those organizations that really is focused on that specific issue. I'm just so glad that you raised it because it speaks to many of these subjective and intransigent decisions that take place in law enforcement and in our justice pipeline that end up defining mass incarceration for us or negative experience that have race disparate outcomes that are difficult to fix because it's not information that a lot of people really know and understand. And so that makes demanding action all the more difficult, right? It's easier to say, we demand justice, we demand parity, but it's more difficult to drill down on it and say, it's these decisions. I want you to fix this. And no, you don't have to guess as to what the solution is. Here's the best practices, just do that. Connecting those dots to make it happen. That's how we move the ball forward. Did I answer the question? Sometimes I just get on a roll and then
you did.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
You did an incredible job.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Yes.
answered the question. You definitely answered the question.
Sorry.
So
I get excited and then I want to like, let me tell you about this too. And then
All right, we got about 17 more minutes left, and I've got a couple of questions I really want to get in here. From Julian and Aishah, and maybe perhaps the 2 artists from their perspective of working with Black executives, but what are the next steps that Black executives in the music industry should take in light of everything that's happening?
Well, as for me, like I'm very fortunate to be signed over to, you know what I'm saying, a label right now that's has 3 Black executives, Community Records, and then under Warner, that's very, you know what I'm saying, you see who's already here right now, Chris Atlas. They're very, it's a very big like mixing pot. So with the executives there, I feel like right now they're doing their job, you feel me, like stepping it up. Chris is here, a lot of people like Warner went ahead and, so I'm getting some feedback. Yeah, but Chris Warner went ahead and donated some money. You know, my label, Community Records, we hopped on a jet immediately. You know what I'm saying? The president even, once we touched down in Minnesota. So I feel like a lot of them are stepping it up. That's just my personal experience.
Yeah, I'll say this. I think one of the things that I can't speak for everybody, you know, but I notice a lot of the artists that get signed are, you know, most of the time come from poverty, they come from the hood. So with that, there's this lack of education on what being signed to a record label actually is and what you're giving up and what, some of the things that you may need to look at and think about before you make certain decisions. I think that a lot of times, like, you know, it's like in a rush. We're in a rush to get this artist and that artist and, you know, streaming and making money and all of these things, but we don't think to educate the artists that we're kind of thinking about doing things with. And look, I understand it's business, whatever, but even if you sign an artist, right, I think there should be more effort in educating them afterwards too, you know? Like there should be a lot more put into that. I think like music managers, even a lot of the times, you know, they'll be like somebody's homeboy and this kid just put out a song and it blew up and they have no idea what's going on. They don't know how to make, they don't know anything about split sheets. They're just learning all of these things now. They're trying to figure out, and a lot of the time, that's why a lot of these artists get mad at the label, because they think a lot of what's going wrong is because of the label, but they don't understand the protocol. I think like we need to put a lot more energy and emphasis in that, especially in the Black community, because, you know, if you're talking about rap, #1 genre, that's where most of the people coming from, you know what I mean? So for me, as far as Black executives go and things like that, I think like, you know, I try to do my best as a, you know, also being an executive, I try to do my best to educate people that I look at, that I'm looking at working with, so they understand what they're getting into. And, you know, I think that that's something I was fortunate to kind of learn a lot of these things myself, or learn from people, you know, that I maybe came across, whether it be my lawyers, whether it be other managers, things like that, you know, but that's because I, you know, did that due diligence. I think like actually giving something that, you know, could educate some of these people, whether it's, I don't know, a class or something, even if it's after they get signed, you know what I mean? It doesn't even have to be before, because I know time is of the essence with things like that, but just offering them something where they could really learn, you know what I'm saying? Not saying it doesn't exist, I just haven't seen it, you know?
Okay. Julian or Aisha on that question before we move over to another one?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we need to put more programs in place that cater to the Black community and people of color, from our internship programs to grooming executives to artist programs that connect with the inner city youth. You know, we have this beautiful multi-million-dollar studio at Warner Records, and we need programs that really reach the younger generation and give creatives an opportunity, a space, a safe space to come in and do just that, and start from the youngest level possible, from school programs all the way up. I feel like systems and programs need to be in place, and that's something we have to work on and push for together.
Can I just?
I was going to make it quick. I was going to say, you know, mentorship, you know, from within, mentorship outside the company, I think is one of the most important things ever. You're not going to become an executive unless there's a pipeline for you to become an executive. You're not going to impact that much change within a building unless you are an executive. So I think there are a number of programs that the people on this panel are going to work on. I know there are programs actually within Warner Music as a whole to deal with mental health, deal with financial literacy, and you know, some of that stuff will be rolled out shortly. But we need to do more, and I think the only way we can do it goes back to what I said earlier, is those hard conversations. I think, you know, we have executives at Warner, African American executives, that care. They care about Black people just as much as they care about getting a check, and I think you got to balance that. And, you know, that I think we have the right mix, the right folks here who are going to help the pipeline, the next wave of executives and impact change. I think mentorship is key.
Okay. Paul, I wanted to address, well, I'm addressing the whole panel. There's some one question here. Where is it? Can we put systems in place where the police have to police themselves, like a law that says 3 confirmed excessive force offenses and you're off the force?
We can. It's really challenging though, because now you're talking about a combination of civil types of cases. I mean, I hate to get all lawyered up and explain it that way, but I'm a lawyer. This is what I do. You know, there are civil rights and civil protections for folks, and those drift into personnel rights and employee rights. And so it's almost, there's a way to approach it, but it's a complicated it's a complicated approach. I think it raises the issue that is equally important, that I think is one of the solutions about what type of subjective decisions get made about employment for officers that have histories of bad behavior. And again, these are some of the questions that we have to raise. What are we doing with those officers? How are they treated? If in your biggest transgression that you are costing the department and or that city a lot of money and misconduct, are you stripped of your title? Are you allowed to stay on the force? Do you continue? Do you keep your retirement and whatever approach that city is doing? Those are valid questions that we have to ask, that I don't see asked often enough, but they're not asked because we don't have structures in place to challenge those individual departments. And again, this is some of the role that I think civilian oversight plays a role in. We have to have those kind of agencies speaking on behalf of broader communities to come up with solutions like this. But that's a really important one. Once we know and we have individual officers who have been identified for misconduct, what are we doing to hold them accountable? It raises the issue of how do we fix that as a systemic issue beyond just an individual issue. This is part of the problems that I think we have with this administration and the federal government. People aren't talking about the civil rights division in the Department of Justice has shrunk to less than half of what it was from the previous administration. Now, what does that mean? In the terms of leadership from this nation to come in and change and do reforms, we haven't seen a major pattern and practice investigation from this Department of Justice in this entire administration. Instead, what we've seen is a focus on those individual transgressions. But what that means is just because you've fixed it in one city doesn't mean that it can't happen in another city. We have to look at the bigger picture to make sure that the successes and the wins that we have long-lasting effects and an impact on broader communities, so that when you fix it in one place, we take those best practices and we find a way to adopt it universally in other cities to make sure that that's happening. And the same thing that I would say in the individual perspective, approaching from private citizens trying to do something and take action. I think IDK was just talking about that his presence, just being there and being around and being in music, makes a difference. And that ties exactly to the executives that are here. And again, this is a whole nother thing that I lecture on and get excited about, is making a difference in our workplaces and in performance. And we spoke about building that pipeline and the mentorship stuff. That is really important. I speak at a lot of schools and I do teaching and trainings and stuff. And it's interesting to me when I talk to specifically communities of color. And if you talk to young kids and they say, listen, they want to be rappers. They want to be in the NBA. They want to be things that they have seen. It is difficult to define, to achieve or work towards success that you can't define, right? Like, just seeing executives, just seeing engineers, just seeing paralegals makes a difference for a lot of these kids. And the fact that you have a beautiful office, the fact that you have a beautiful studio, there has to be a pipeline bringing folks in with intentionality. You can't just build it and then hope that it happens. This is the same thing that I find oftentimes in government and in lucrative industries. Like banking, like finances, like in any of the professions where it's difficult to get into those opportunities, to expose yourself to what the chances are to open the doors. And we will build, you'll see that there's a false pipeline, right? Like they'll have a great industry and there's a great opportunity to have an internship, and the internship is unpaid. Well, you have now correlated the socioeconomic limitations to a race limitations, because we can't have a conversation about socioeconomics without talking about race. So you have built a program that is wonderful and beautiful for the summer, and you feel like you have done something, and then you step back and you say, only 2 African-American students applied. We have no LGBT students that are interested in this. There are no women coming to our executive table. You have to act with intentionality, and that's where we embrace our power. That's where we lean into our opportunities to say, no, I'm going to call my school. No, I'm going to reach out to the Black Student Association. No, I'm going to do more to make sure that these resumes are part of what gets reviewed and part of the decision-making process that's taking place just here and around me. And these are things that don't necessarily cost us a lot of money. Those of us that have gone to these fancy schools and have these prestigious degrees, you can donate $21, because it usually is the $20 limit before they pay attention to you, to get on their alumni list, and then write those letters of recommendations for people that come from your community so that they are getting into those schools, and then exercising your voice to ask them, who are your professors and why don't these professors look like me? There's not a whole lot of people that are graduating with a PhD in criminal justice reform, but that doesn't mean that we can empower ourselves with just these conversations and just our music and just our presence in the room to make a difference for the communities, our family and our friends and our loved ones. Even the conversations like this, we are all advocates. The artists that we have here have such broad platforms because people are listening to them, but the people that are just listening to this conversation can make a difference today by putting these conversations and others in their social media, because we can't ask others to care more about the things than we care about, and we have to be able to say that we care about it. It's powerful to follow a thought leader on Instagram. It's powerful to listen to people that we think are saying the right thing on Twitter and retweeting that just to redefine the values that we have ourselves so that more people are informed as to what's important and what they can do. We can't take a precatory approach and hope that it all works out because we care deeply about it. We have to say it. We have to talk about it. We have to model it so that other people know, and then they can follow that and more people can join the group so that there's a flashpoint to mandate the changes that we all want to take place in society. I don't even remember the question. I get sorry.
Oh, you got it. So we're closing in. Thank you, Paul. We're closing in. I know Chris said earlier that this is the first in a series of things that town halls, I think that Warner Records wants to do, because there's some other questions that have come in, like the intersection of everything that's going on with mental health, which is a major concern in the Black community. The same thing with LGBTQ, because it's queer women are at the helm of the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's a whole intersection. There's other topics to discuss, but in the time we got left, 2 minutes, I just want to get a closing comment or word from each of the folks. Rumor, IDK, Aishah, Julian, and Paul. Just real quick. Rumor.
I feel like this was very progressive. You know what I'm saying? Like all of us getting together and speaking on this, and moving forward, I'm going to continue to, you feel me, use my platform for change. You know, whatever I can get to, I can get to.
Okay, IDK.
Yeah, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you guys for putting this together. I'm never in a place where I feel anything is owed to me, even with what's going on. I do think that this is necessary and needs to happen, but everyone is free to do whatever they want and handle things however they want. So I appreciate you guys putting this together, taking the time to do this. For me, I've learned a few different things and heard a few different things, especially from Paul, that I've never really heard before. You know what I mean? So thank you very much for having me here. I'm glad that I could do this with Chris, Rumor, you, Gail, and Julian, you know what I mean? And Aishah, of course, So thank you guys for having me here and putting this together.
Aishah.
Yeah, just same sentiments. I really appreciate everyone coming out, taking the time to listen, to learn, and to be a part of this movement. This is just the beginning. We are going to keep fighting, keep pushing, and keep making sure that we tap in with our community and our industry, and figure out different ways to work together on this common goal. So, first of many, and I'm here if you guys have any questions, ideas, anything. This revolution will be televised. Let's keep it going.
Exactly. And Paul?
Oh, I would just like to say in closing that I was a fan of most of the people on this call beforehand, but I feel like I'm an even bigger fan now, and I've gotten new people, not in a weird, creepy way, but in a professional way and an intellectual way, because I appreciate and I get really excited just to have conversations like this, because I think they're important. And to the degree that you participated and had something to do with making a conversation like this possible, to make the trainings possible, to make the lectures and presentations possible, to address these difficult issues, I think that's really important. I'm humbled by the platform and having the opportunity to talk to folks and raise these issues, but I'm really excited because I feel like I get to take away from these conversations knowledge and awareness that my own radicalism in my head is shared amongst a broader community. And the ideas that we all talk about, there's enough room in the platform for everyone to do something. We just have to talk about those ideas, because what we're not talking about doesn't get done. And I just appreciate having the opportunity to be on this platform with all of you to promulgate ideas that ultimately, I hope, will lead to action and make some long-lasting changes that are going to improve everyone. So thank you.
Yeah.
And Julian.
Well, Paul is definitely going to lead to action. That I can promise you.
I will help. I will help.
There you, but my kids are going crazy in the background, so I'm not going to be long. I just want one word: vote. That's all I got.
Exactly.
Vote.
Exactly.
And
All right, thank you all. It was great. We've gotten some great comments, and I hope to do this again with you, but it's, as everyone has said, it's onward and upward. We're moving forward, and
Hey,
nothing's
Gail.
gonna stop us at this point. So thanks, Chris. Thanks, Warner Records.
All right, Gail, in closing, again, I think just to echo, this is the first of many. We have, the commitment of the Warner executive team, Tom Corson, Aaron Bayshuk, and the full Warner Records continue this conversation and be very present and vocal in working towards change. So thank you all for being a part of the conversation today, and a lot more to come.
So
Great. Look forward to it.
All right, thank you all.
Thank
nice
you.
to meet everyone.
Don't leave me out. I don't want to miss anything.